El Nino is stalled. Why? And what's to come? I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, July 2nd.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and like and subscribe. Ring the bell. You get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. And if you'd like to donate to the cause, hit the special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Peter Belden, Elliot Harris, Sporman, Jason, and Jason again, thank you. Baja Bugs, Spat Out in Glory Film, and Horn Shark. All, thank you so much for your generous contributions. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. We see remnants of a gale still producing 22-foot seas, pushing into Chile and eventually up into Peru. This from a previous system in the far southeast Pacific. We'll get into the details on that in a minute. And a newly developing system, maybe the first of the entire season, trying to get traction southeast and east of New Zealand, potentially, I say potentially, making surf, or at least swell, pushing towards Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast a few days from now. But we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. So let's go take a look at current conditions. We'll start in Northern California. Point Reyes buoy number 029. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy. Anywhere from up to 33.3 second period, really long period energy, all the way down to 5 second period, just pure wind chop. I mean, nothing really rideable. We see a clear bump of wind swell in about the 9 second period. And then if you look real close, right here at 20 seconds, a tiny little bump of energy, 4/10 of a foot out here, newly arriving swell from the far southeast Pacific, starting to make its way into Northern California. If we try to consolidate all this together, we see primary swell 6.1 feet at 9.5 seconds from 319 degrees. That would make surf theoretically at nearly 6 feet on the face. It isn't that big. It's chest high, maybe at top spots, but certainly rideable. And the southern hemi energy so small, doesn't even really register yet on the formula. Then we go down to Southern California, Point Loma South. This is like San Diego area. Buoy number 191. Again, that same profile, the southern hemi swell, right somewhere around 19 seconds, we'll say. And the wind swell, just about all completely shadowed. So this looks a little bit better. Primary swell, 0.7 of a foot from 19.1 seconds from 175 degrees. That would make surf at 1.3 feet. I think it's actually a little bit bigger at that at top south facing breaks. And then the wind swell, 1.1 feet at 11.1 seconds. And that says 183 degrees. But that's not right. It's coming more from the northwest, but still minimal surf. And then finally we go to Hawaii, the island of Oahu, Barbers Point, buoy number 238. We're looking, and really there's just nothing going on. A little bit of wind swell energy, nothing else meaningful. Primary swell 1.4 feet at 9.3 seconds from 169 degrees. That's surf at, I don't know, knee high, something like that. That's about what it's actually doing. So we go back in time. We're going back a week ago, Saturday, June 24th, a little bit over a week ago. A little gale started building here in the southeast Pacific with 31-foot seas right here, 31.8 feet. These are the highest seas and the highest winds over this entire domain. So theoretically, winds at 52 knots and seas at 31 feet. And that lifted a little bit northeast into Sunday. Seas again about 31 feet there. The Southern California, edge of the Southern California swell window about 117 west, so right about here. That's San Diego roughly. Still in the swell window. This thing, You see it lifting north. It actually redeveloped on Monday a little bit, mostly out of the Southern California swell window, focusing on South and Central America, but another gale built right behind it, almost in the exact same spot, just a little bit further south, with 32-foot seas, building to 33 feet on Tuesday, the 27th of June, and then lifting northeast as well, holding in the swell window to Wednesday, and even lingering into Thursday and Friday, and then more energy behind that, but out east of the Southern California swell window. This is that seas that we saw targeting South America, and continuing on while slowly fading and pushing east. You see also the beginnings, we'll go back here just a little bit, on Saturday, even Friday the 30th of June, the beginnings of low pressure trying to get organized southeast of New Zealand, but notice all this fetch falling to the south, not generating any swell, pushing north, and then here we are at present time. So, two systems in the far southeast Pacific have generated swell, pushing north, and something trying to get organized off of New Zealand. Much better place than where we've been. Looking forward, what's going on? We're going to start looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 20,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a push in the jet to the north, just like we see right here. What that helps do is create a clockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. A clockwise flow is low pressure in the southern hemisphere, and of course those winds, if they're strong enough, start getting traction on the ocean surface. They generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area to the north, eventually turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So the trough is the start of all of it. And we have one. New Zealand right there, Australia there. Down here is Antarctica, the Ross Ice Shelf, about 65 south, something like that. Okay, we also have a ridge here. It's pretty weak, pushing to the south. That does nothing to support gale formation, just supports high pressure. Then you also see a pretty well-defined trough here in the far southeast Pacific, but outside of the California swell window, but targeting South and Central America, with swell being generated from that. All right, as we get into Monday, the trough continues off of New Zealand, and even into Tuesday, continue with more reinforcing energy pushing into it. Notice the ridge in the Central Pacific digging hard south into Antarctica proper. As we get into Wednesday, the trough still continues, but winds on this side of it getting weaker, not really doing a whole lot to support gale development. The trough and the ridge pushing hard south into Antarctica proper, and as we get into Friday, things just kind of fall apart. But you notice what maybe is the start of some sort of a trough building in the Tasman Sea as we get into Sunday, a week out. The northern branch of the jet stream pretty strong with winds 170 knots. Southern branch still pretty weak. We'll see if this plays out. Other than that, though, pretty not great pattern for the Central and Southeast Pacific in terms of swell production, but the Tasman Sea trying to open up again, maybe a change in pattern trying to set up. So that's upper levels of the atmosphere. Let's go down towards the surface. Surface level pressure, surface level winds. Not unexpectedly, the trough here in the far southeast Pacific has generated gale with 30-knot winds pushing to the north. That's generating the seas we saw there. But again, Southern California, San Diego cut off about 117 west here, so of no concern. Great for South Central America and up into Mexico, but not for U.S. interests. But then we see this broad kind of complex gale, 1, 2, 3 kind of gale centers all rotating around each other. Not in the most of the fetch over New Zealand, but as we get into Monday, notice 30 to 35 knot winds starting to build, pushing northeast along New Zealand, continuing in the evening at 35 knots. maybe a little bit stronger, building more as we get into Tuesday with a broad area fetch. Now, not super strong winds, but just steady, continued fetch over a broad area aimed well off to the northeast, with fetch building to 40 knots as we get into Tuesday night and Wednesday. That all starts flattening out and falling apart, but Hawaii being it, in fact, let's go back here, just take a look real quick. Right there, Hawaii is about 155, 158 west. All this clearly in their swell window as well as the California swell window. So looking pretty good. We go further out, a bit of fetch tries to organize but doesn't do it, and you notice things get very weak as we get into Friday and Saturday of next week. And then we get into Sunday, another bit of low pressure trying to organize. Same deal. This south fetch aimed at Antarctica does nothing for us. Also, look at this, a bit of fetch here in the far southeast Pacific on Sunday. And then more fetch over Tasmania, trying to work its way into the Tasman Sea. We'll just see how this all plays out, but a somewhat promising pattern is looking to develop. What's the effect of those winds on the ocean surface? Well, we're keeping our eyes under New Zealand as we get into Monday afternoon. What is this? 20, 22, 24, maybe 25-foot seas in here. Monday evening into Tuesday, 26, almost 27-foot seas trying to slide under New Zealand, building solidly to 27 feet, pushing northeast, and they're 28 feet Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, 29 feet even. This morning's run of the model even had like 31-foot seas in this area, and then that slowly fading out. That's only about 72 hours out or so. Seems reasonable that would happen, and if so, about a week later, swell would be radiating north towards Hawaii, then in a couple days beyond that into California. Now, nothing huge. I mean, we didn't even break the 30-foot seas mark. The aerial coverage of those seas, not particularly huge. We'll look at it one more time. We'll put the whole thing into motion. You can see it here. But a push in the right direction, certainly good for generating some like 15 or 16 second period swell. And we'll take anything we can get this time of year. Moving on into Friday and Saturday, quiet pattern in control. As we get into Sunday, yeah, there are some seas down here in the southeast Pacific. We saw that fetch, but only 22 or maybe 23 feet, and then weakening after that, and nothing yet over in the far southwest Pacific. But we'll see. Maybe things will work out for us. And then the local wind forecast. All right, the pattern has been high pressure in control of the Gulf of Alaska. It creates a pressure gradient with lower pressure, heat generated lower pressure over California. That tightens up the isobars, creating wind 25 to 30 knot winds right off of Cape Mendocino. But near shore to California, a light wind regime today. Hawaii, light trades at 10 knots or so. As we get into Monday, more of the same. Now we're looking, this also affects water temperatures. Now the good news is, right all in here, it's the arrows or the wind barbs are showing northwesterly winds, but it's really a southerly flow, eddy flow. That's pretty typical, especially when you see the fetch just all isolated to Cape Mendocino. That should help warm water temperatures even more. They're not bad. They're not cooking hot, but they're certainly not cold. For the time of year, though, definitely colder than normal. We'll talk about that just a little bit in the long-term outlook. For Hawaii, the typical trades in the 10 to 15 knot range. Wednesday, pretty much the same thing again, trades for Hawaii. Thursday, even that gradient starts fading, but notice it starts falling south. Winds 15 knots over all of California, except for Southern California. Light trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Friday, the fetch starts building again along the coast. The south eddy flow wiped out, but not too strong. 15, 20 knots, that's pretty normal. And Friday trades at 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. As we get into Saturday, same sort of deal. The gradient still down over California. Not particularly great. Trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Now notice this. High pressure settling in. You get this elongated fetch. Maybe that does a little bit better for creating east wind swell for the Hawaiian Islands. And then as we get into Sunday and Monday, here we go. It looks like another blow for California. Northwest winds, strong high pressure, and a broad fetch of east trades at 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands, generating wind swell. And then finally, a look at precipitation, frozen precipitation, not a chance. For the Tioga Pacific Crest Trail, where it intersects with Tioga Pass Road, up in the higher elevations of Yosemite, clearly no frozen precipitation. And summer fully arrived now. The reds, liquid precipitation, the whole way up to 14,000 foot. The freeze level, 14,000 feet or more for the foreseeable future. This is finally what you would typically expect to see in summer, but it's delayed at least 4 weeks, if not 6 or 8 weeks. We'll get into that in the long-term discussion. So what's the surf forecast? We're going to look at Half Moon Bay. That's a good representation for Northern California. I mean, wind swell, you can just see it here, right about 3 feet, maybe spiking up a little bit here and there. Winds, not too bad near the coast, especially the early part of the week, picking up a little bit on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but still not horribly bad. Swell analysis, wind swell, 3 feet at 9 seconds. You see bits and pieces of the southern hemi swell trying to show up here. This is the bigger of the two southern hemi swells. This is on Thursday and Friday, and then wind swell taking over. Let's go take a look down in Santa Cruz. Surf heights in the 2 foot range, then starting to pop up maybe to 2.5 feet, something like that, as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. Now you can see the larger of the two southern hemi swells beating out the wind swell, pure swell size of 1.5 feet at 15 seconds, something like that. So nothing huge, but definitely some wind swell. Let's go look at Southern California. That does even better because most of the northwest wind swell is filtered out. Dana Point, you see surf heights 3 feet, something like that, pretty much continuing. Starting around Wednesday. Down here looking at it, you can actually see the first of the southern hemi swells hitting, as we get into Monday morning, 1.4 feet at almost 18 seconds, building to about 1.8 feet at 14 to 15 seconds as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. Then the next swell hits with swell heights in the 2 to 2.2 to almost 2.4 feet at 14, 15, 16 seconds, something like that. And then continuing on even into next weekend. So a good long run of small, rideable southern hemi swell from the two systems that have already done their thing in the far southeast Pacific. And then a quick look at Oahu, South Shore. Unfortunately, they are not in the swell window. Those two gales in the far southeast Pacific were way to the east of Hawaii. Pretty much the pattern that we've had all summer. That's a classic La Nina kind of pattern. All the southern hemi energy develops for the most part in the far southeast Pacific. Conversely, during El Nino years, the New Zealand area is prime real estate. That's where all the swells come. Hawaii is front and center for all that, but not this year. We're not there. Surf heights, 1 to 1.5 feet. We'll look at source of the swell. It's all wind swell. Maybe a little dribble of something as but that's northwest swell. It's from like 339 degrees, so that's not even realistic. So a continuation of small surf heights for the Hawaiian Islands until the New Zealand corridor opens. All right, what's going on long term? The two major oscillations we use to look long term, the Madden-Julian Oscillation and the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We start by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. It's this periodic weather oscillation that rotates around the planet from west to east. There's two phases, the active and the inactive phase. The active phase on one side of the planet, inactive phase on the other. They rotate west to east opposite each other around the planet. The active phase is the good phase, the inactive phase the bad phase. That is, The bad phase, the inactive phase, is a high pressure system. It stomps on swell production and storm production. But the active phase, if sufficiently strong, it is a low pressure system. As it moves over the far west Pacific, it starts sucking up moist, warm air from the ocean surface on the equator, lifting it high into the atmosphere. The jet stream taps that, be it either in the northern hemi or the southern hemi, and that fuels the jet stream, making it stronger, helping to dig out troughs like we talked about earlier, and that helps create storms, which helps generate surf. Also, the active phase, when it's in the far west Pacific, dampens trade winds, the typical east to west trade wind flow. And what that in turn does is allows warm water that's normally pulled up in the far west Pacific to start sloshing east on the equator, held in place by the Coriolis force, and following the thermocline down in the ocean across the Pacific, not on the surface, but underneath the surface of the equator, eventually 3 to 4 months later erupting off of Ecuador or along the Ecuadorian coast and the Galapagos, drawing to the surface, creating a warm water slick there. If you have successive active phases of the MJO, you can get successive Kelvin waves. That's exactly where we are right now. With this developing El Nino, we've had 6 active phases of the MJO that have created 6 Kelvin waves that are stacked up, back building, erupting to the surface off of Ecuador as we speak. But the question is, will there be more? Will that add more fuel to the El Nino machine, or have we stalled? So first, we look for signs of the active phase of the MJO on the equator using this data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino, but they also have wind sensors on them. So we can look at this chart. This is the far west Pacific here, the east Pacific here. 0 is the equator, the date line, 180 west right there. That little gray blob there, that is New Guinea. All right, we're looking at the arrows. These are winds. The longer the arrow, the stronger the wind. So trade winds out of the east, pretty strong in the East Pacific, also pretty strong over the Central Pacific. But notice when you get to the West Pacific, they die, if not almost reverse. That suggests the active phase of the MJO in the West Pacific, or maybe something more insidious in a good way. But it's not the actual wind speeds that matter. It's anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. Because if the winds just slacken, if the trade winds slacken relative to the normal wind speeds this time of year, that's enough to create a Kelvin wave. And of course, Kelvin waves help support El Nino development. So we look in the far East Pacific, we see the arrows, well, not going either east or west, just north or south. So pretty much neutral winds there. In the Central Pacific, maybe a little bit stronger out of the east than normal, but whoa, lo and behold here, in the West Pacific, a strong, long arrow suggesting westerly anomalies, pretty decent here in the far West Pacific. Again, another indicator of potential active phase of the MJO. What's the forecast for the next 2 weeks? All right, so this is data from the GFS model, the typical global wind model that also is used to drive the significant wave height model, the NOAA WaveWatch 3 wave model. Now, this is 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. Fancy words for are the winds blowing harder out of the east or harder out of the west. The blues, easterly anomalies. That would be the inactive phase of the MJO. The yellows and oranges, westerly anomalies, the active phase of the MJO. But this is all the planet on one chart. There's the date line running right up the middle. The far west Pacific starts about 125 east, so right there. So the area we're interested in is the Kelvin wave generation area, because the more Kelvin waves you have, the more that forces El Nino, or the development of El Nino. So here we are today. Oh, and the Kelvin wave generation area ends just east of the date line, about 170 west, so right there. So this is the forecast here. This is what has been happening. The area we're interested in is from here over to about here. That's it. Now we can see easterly anomalies in the early part of June. A Kelvin wave, or active phase of the MJO, looks like it developed somewhere in the early part of June, then quickly faded out. We've gotten this easterly anomaly pattern that's been set up for the past we'll say 2 weeks. Looks like it's going to go for another week, okay? Light easterly anomalies, and then as we get into about July 7th, westerly anomalies start building and filling the Kelvin wave generation area. We'll say, oh, that's not even a week. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 days from now. 5 days from now, and then we're back in business with westerly anomalies in the far west Pacific, according to the GFS model. Now, this is really interesting. At some point, we're going to start looking at the CFS model. It paints a rosier picture, and these two models have been kind of battling it out for the past month. We've been trying to, or wanting optimistically to side with the CFS because it looks more optimistic, but the GFS is verified better, and these easterly anomalies, the CFS didn't even want to really show these. It did, but not nearly as strong as what the GFS has done. Now, thank goodness, the GFS has been steadily backing off its easterly wind anomaly projection, so it kind of overhyped it in the bad direction. The CFS has overhyped it in the good direction. We're coming out somewhere in between. Let's keep digging. So yet another model, this is a statistic model, the CA model. This is its projection for cloud cover, okay? Outgoing long wave radiation right there. Just the sun bouncing off the ocean surface. If you have more clouds, you get negative anomalies, the blues. That would be the active phase of the MJO. If you have no clouds, clear skies, that's high pressure, that'd be the inactive phase of the MJO. That's the yellow and oranges. So let's get oriented. This model goes out 15 days. Here's today, 5 days, 10 days, 15 days from now. That's about 2 weeks. South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea there, dateline right there, equator right there. Kelvin wave generation area roughly here. With the yellows and oranges, that's more sunlight bouncing off the ocean surface. That suggests inactive phase of the MJO. Wait a minute. The previous model just sort of suggested like westerly anomalies kind of hanging here. So we got a little bit of a mix-up going on here. 5 days from now, inactive phase, still in control, but then fading 10 days from now and 15 days from now, with the active phase, according to the statistic model, all balled up in the Indian Ocean. We go look at the dynamic model, it's not any better. This would be the GEFS. This is the ensemble GFS model. It's saying inactive phase holding for the next 2 weeks. But wait, we just looked at a chart that said, well, it looks like westerly anomalies developing maybe 5 days from now. So the cloud cover and the westerly wind anomaly are not linked one-to-one. There's a little bit of a disparity, at least according to the GFS, and I suspect the building of westerly anomalies is the leading indicator of an active phase of the MJO, where the cloud cover follows by some amount of time, let's say a week or so. Digging in a little deeper, these are phase diagram charts. One for the statistic model, the CA model, and the other one for the GEFS model. How do you read this? What's this all mean? Well, the active phase of the MJO moves from west to east around the planet, from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, that'd be like Bali, to the West Pacific, over the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. Remember? They just constantly are in motion, sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, but opposite each other. This is the active phase. The dot is where the active phase is, so it's somewhere in the Indian Ocean. That's pretty much what the other chart we just looked at said. Now, if the dot is near this circle or inside of it, it's considered very weak. So that's a very weak active phase today. These are the 1, 2, 3 forecast tracks per the statistic model, having it basically somewhere in the far west maritime continent 2 weeks from now, and for the most part, pretty weak. The GFS model has it going pretty much the same thing, in the far west maritime continent and very weak 2 weeks from now. So not any immediate hope from the MJO, and that is kind of key. The weakness of the MJO says a lot. We'll get into more in just a second. The upper level model showing areas favorable for precipitation. The greens favorable for precip, oranges and reds, dry air. All right, and let's get ourselves oriented. South America, Central America, 0 is the equator. Dateline roughly right here. There's New Guinea. There's the Philippines, Maritime Continent. These islands, they're all like the island nation. That's why they call it the Maritime Continent. Anyway, greens showing area favorable for precipitation theoretically over the West Pacific today. And this goes out 40 days, 5 days a panel. So greens, the active phase of the MJO, building over the Pacific through about mid to late July, July 22nd, then starting to fade, pushing into the East Pacific, while the inactive phase, the dry air pattern of the MJO, starts setting up, beginning of August and through the month of August. So July, active phase, August, inactive phase. And it takes about 4 to 5 weeks for any one phase of the MJO to make it across the Pacific. And if the active phase does generate a Kelvin wave over here, it takes 3 to 4 months for that Kelvin wave to make it from here to here. And now the more optimistic model, the CFS model, and this goes out a month. Past performance here, forecast down here. Now you can actually see the active phases of the MJO in this chart. Let's get oriented first. Date line running right up the middle. This is the east-west component of the wind. The reds, westerly anomalies, typically associated with the active phase of the MJO. The blues, the inactive phase, easterly anomalies. Now the dotted contour here, you can see it's MJO is the black line. If it's dotted, that's inactive phase. So we had an active phase in April. An inactive phase the end of April, a strong active phase in May, the whole month of May basically, with strong westerly anomalies. See the dark reds, and tropical development associated with those westerly anomalies. A very weak inactive phase setting up the early part of June. And now here's where we are. Well, you see westerly anomalies, we had them in June. No MJO really indicated. Today, just this little tiny area of an inactive phase of the MJO set up, forecast for a couple of days, maybe 5 or 6 days in July on the date line. And winds, light westerly anomalies, maybe a tiny little pocket of easterly anomalies, but pretty much like a neutral pattern. Then theoretically, according to the CFS model, a week from now, so that'd be when we're doing the video next week, strong westerly anomalies building in the core of the Kelvin wave generation area. Again, this area 125 east to about 170 west, so right here in this box, and then holding pretty much through the whole month of July. Now, if I recall, the GFS model said easterly anomalies, and then these westerly anomalies didn't start till almost about a week and a half out. So the CFS model, again, seemed to be a little optimistic. The GFS model, maybe a little pessimistic. Let's keep going. All right, so this is the long run of the CFS model. Past performance is down here. The forecast up here. Okay, so it's flipped them. Kelvin wave generation area starts 125 east and ends about 180 west. We see massive amounts of blue. Now, this is outgoing long wave radiation, and blues are negative anomalies, meaning cloud cover buildup. So this suggests a lot of clouds in the middle of the Kelvin wave generation area, and actually you see it's verified. It's already been happening and forecast to continue for the next 3 months. That would be the active phase of the MJO just completely setting up. Now let's go look at zonal wind anomalies, 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. It paints the exact same picture, only the yellows and oranges, westerly anomalies, the blues, easterly anomalies. Kelvin wave generation area, again, is right in this area, right here. Strong westerly anomalies, not super strong, we'll say modest to moderate westerly anomalies. Forecast developing, not even a week from now, maybe a couple days from now. Growing in coverage, filling the Kelvin wave generation area for the foreseeable future. Let's overlay the MJO. So here it is. Today, we're in this inactive phase of the MJO, this dotted contour here. Now, it's supposed to hold into July, we'll say about 15th or 16th, but even at that, it must be weakening because westerly anomalies are forecast building 5 days from now. Then we go into the active phase of the MJO starting June 15th and going the whole way through September. So that's July 15th into the early part of September. So that's a 6-week-long active phase supporting westerly anomaly development, hopefully another Kelvin wave. And then the inactive phase after that, but even with that, westerly anomaly is in control. Now let's overlay the low-pass filter here. This is the high-pressure, low-pressure bias, and I can actually pull the MJO out of here. Okay, the dotted contour is the La Nina indicator, the high-pressure bias that was for 3 years over the dateline, just getting thinner and weaker and moving east, pretty much south of California right now, and as we get to the end of September, supposed to be all gone completely, as the low-pressure bias right here, which has been over the maritime continent, and that's what fuels, great summer storm development, or actually be winter in the southern hemisphere, over in the Indian Ocean. Well, now it's moving, setting up close to the dateline, today with 1, 2, 3 contours, and then supporting all that westerly wind development. So the reality is I put the MJO on here. I'll take the low-pass filter out. And it looks like these winds are really associated with the MJO. And they are. The MJO is amplifying the low-pressure bias. They are constructively interfering with each other. But they basically get in sync. They amplify the pattern. But even when the MJO turns inactive up here, let's put that here, you still have westerly anomalies. That's because this low pressure base state is taking over the Pacific. That's exactly what we want to see. And that continued westerly wind development is what is supposedly going to continue to fuel El Nino development. And it does that via creating Kelvin waves that travel across the Pacific or up off of Ecuador, feeding the building warm pool there. But there's a bit of a rub on this, and the concerns are the strength of the active phase of the MJO, and will it actually create a Kelvin wave, or will it not be strong enough? That is the debate. All right, so let's go take a look down in the ocean. We've talked about the MJO and the machine that forces Kelvin wave development, which is the MJO. That really, the core of it is all focused over the maritime continent in the far west Pacific. But just because the MJO is pushing across the Pacific doesn't mean that it's changing the weather pattern in the Pacific itself. Just like, 2 years ago or so, 3 years ago, we had mega surf in the up in the North Pacific off of Mavericks and Half Moon Bay, and yet we were deep in La Nina. What was driving that? It was the very strong, intense, active phases of the MJO. The La Nina base state had basically taken a break and allowed the MJO to roar across the Pacific. It fueled storm development, and then just as quickly as it came, it left, and everything shut down, and our whole winter was basically 1 month of surf driven by the active phase of the MJO. This past winter, all the cold, wet storms coming into California. We were in La Nina. What was driving all that? It was the MJO, the active phase of the MJO. Now, was it changing the base state of the Pacific? It was, yes, but only temporarily. It was feeding energy into the jet stream, feeding storm development, bringing massive amounts of moisture into California. But at the end of the day, the base state of the Pacific still was La Nina. We'll get into that a little bit more in a second. So let's look down in the ocean, okay? The MJO fuels the jet stream, can temporarily make changes. What it really does is forces warm water in the West Pacific East in the form of a Kelvin wave. So we're looking for presence or signs of Kelvin wave development. This is data from the TAO buoy array. Again, that series of buoys that are strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. These little X's here, these are the anchor lines on those buoys. They have sensors on them. They collect temperature data, use a model to fill in the gaps in between the sensors, and you get a profile of what's going on down in the ocean. This is the far East Pacific here. This is the far West Pacific, going down 100, 200, 300 meters. That's like 900 feet, okay? But really, all the movement of warm water is from about 150 meters up, so just this much of the chart. Now we see the 30-degree isotherm. That's 30 degrees centigrade. That's a lot warmer. That's very warm water. A year ago, none of this was even on the chart. Last week, I think it was 178, almost at 180. It has backtracked a little bit to about 175, even 174 east today. The 29-degree isotherm, I think it was at 158 west last week. It's backtracked a little bit too. The 28-degree isotherm, it was over at 120. It's backtracked a little too. And the 26-degree isotherm, still pushing deep into the Far East Pacific. Now, what's this mean? Well, just guessing, it would say there's no Kelvin wave in flow at the minute. It's not to say that like El Nino is collapsing, but just right now it sort of seems like we're in a pause. We can look at anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year, and you can see a clear pattern, 5, 6, 7 degree above normal temperatures in the East Pacific. That's quite impressive. The 2-degree line right here, where is that? That is about 165 east. But you know what? Last week, I think it was even further west than that. It suggests that warm water is here. It's flowing in from previously generated active phases of the MJO. So this is the summation of multiple Kelvin waves all stacked against each other. But you look back here, we want to see another Kelvin wave, and we don't see it. It's literally the Kelvin wave generating machine, that is the active phases of the MJO, have stalled, and with it, the machine that supplies fuel to the development of El Nino has stalled. Now, there's probably 3 months worth of warm water here, something like that. So where are we? July, August, and September. There's plenty of fuel here. But if you are, we've been talking about a super El Nino. If you want to have a super El Nino, you need more Kelvin waves. You need Kelvin waves going the whole way into August, September minimum. And right now, we don't see any, at least on this chart. Let's go look at some other technology. Here is subsurface temperature profiles obtained a different way using a satellite, okay? But we see, well, there's the big pocket of warm temperatures in the East Pacific. There's that tail that goes to about 165 west, something like that. Now, this suggests, what is that? Just 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This suggests 2 to 3 degree anomalies in a steady flow pushing off the maritime continent here towards the east. This suggests now that the Kelvin wave fuel pipeline is still loaded. Maybe not as extremely strong as it was, but the reality is I think the strength of the MJOs have faded lately too. And that in turn has made a less virulent flow of warm water off to the east. It's still there, but just not as strong. Interesting. So here's the raw data, sea level anomalies. This is what drives that previous chart. Satellite, polar orbiting satellite, rotates around the just in a circle around the planet. The Earth turns under it. What that does is the satellite beams down radar, and it's measuring the height of the ocean versus the sphere of the ocean. Take out the waves, take out the wind waves, take out the tide. Is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? Why is that? Well, warm water at depth, it expands. If it expands, it'll create a bump on the ocean surface. This satellite can track that. Likewise, cold water at depth contracts. By at depth, I'm talking down 100, 150 meters. It'll contract and create a divot on the ocean surface. So this is that map. It looks like temperatures, but it's really height of the ocean. Let's get ourselves oriented. Chile, Peru, Ecuador right there, the Galapagos right there. There's the equator. There is the dateline. Central America there. New Guinea right there. Now what this says is 0 to 5 centimeter or 5 centimeter plus anomalies coming off the maritime continent, falling to depth, continuing in a river across the Pacific. Then we have 10 centimeter plus anomalies the whole way from, well, where's that? About 135 west. So that's a month or two's worth. So this suggests, yeah, we have that big ball of warm water. Notice it's impacting Ecuador, spreading south and north, but not making it significantly north, not making it significantly south, and continued flow of warm water, but it sort of smells like there's not a lot of forcing going on. It's a steady, gentle stream versus a raging torrent of warm water pushing east. And that's what we had back in all of spring up to maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And now things have really settled down in regards to the MJO. And with the MJO getting weaker, the flow of warm water has weakened too. Steady, but not impressive like it was. And you can see that pretty well here. This is the upper ocean heat anomalies. This is the East Pacific here, West Pacific here. We're going back a year. This would be July of last year. Cold water all off of South America. We don't have to deal with that anymore. You can see, in fact, Kelvin wave number 1. Oh, notice the massive pool of warm water that was in the West Pacific, driven by stronger than normal trades, driven by La Nina and the preponderance of the inactive phase of the MJO. We got 1 Kelvin wave barely drifted across in like December. Stronger one in January, another one in February, another one in March, another one in April. So that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and another one here in May, number 6, creating this massive pool of warm water in the far East Pacific. And we still have warm water present, but it seems like what we need is some strong active phase of the MJO to grab the warm water that's all hiding and nestled up in the islands of the maritime continent, to force it into the Pacific and get it on back in the pipeline, pushing off to the east to really get El Nino to build a little bit. So then, let's talk about sea surface temperatures, right? We had talked about the warm water. In fact, we'll do the quick over here. Active phase of the MJO in the West Pacific drives westerly anomalies that take warm water in the islands of the maritime continent, force them into the Pacific. The anomalies, it looks like they're falling to depth. Maybe they are. They're certainly not at the surface. Then they make the 3 to 4 month trip across the Pacific. They impact Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. They start getting forced to the surface. And then we see the results of that on the ocean surface temperature anomaly charts. So here we go. Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Central America, Hawaii out here, the equator right here. Clear, the reds, warmer than normal temperatures. This is actually built a bit from last week. I think there was some easterly wind anomaly thing going on here in the East Pacific. That has settled down. The warm water is erupting to the surface, looking quite good. Then it gets caught by the trades and starts drifting off to the east. That said, over here in the far West Pacific, we had that sort of this area of color right here was the whole way out to the date line last week. It's done this a couple times. It sort of builds, and then it's like there's some wind event that sort of mixes things up, cools it. So it looks like it's cooling today. The extent of these darker shades of orange, they seemed a little bit stronger perhaps too last week. But in general, this is holding. It's certainly not building. That said, it's the beginning of July. This is a pretty good place for temperatures to be for July if you're trying to go down the El Nino development route. If you're looking for a super El Nino, well, we can talk about that in just a second. This maybe doesn't hit that grade anymore, but it's not too far off the mark. Sea surface temperature trend the past 7 days. You actually see here is Ecuador and the Galapagos. A little bit of warming right in here. This is better than we've seen for the past couple of weeks. Again, suggesting that maybe local winds are just dying there. Trades fading to neutral or below neutral, allowing the warm water to mix up. Last week, this was all in the yellows out here. It has not done that. It's not really getting colder. It's that kind of greenish thing. So it's just neutral, but that would explain the lack of warming out here that we saw on the previous chart. And then the overview chart, again, showing just definite El Nino, strong El Nino, it looks like, building with a clear signature here, but it's not getting any stronger. It's not increasing its footprint as one would expect. Now, maybe there's a reason for that, but we'll get there in just a second. We need a little bit more data to put this all in perspective, and then I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you, and you can use what we've talked about here and decide whether you agree or disagree. All right, Nino 3.4 index. This is the area right there by the Galapagos and Ecuador. Temperatures cooking warm, plus 885 thousandths of a degree above normal, and you can see the trend dead flat for, well, April, May, June, 3 months of just steady warm temperatures. The official El Nino region, the Nino 3.4 index, this is kind of what we're complaining about a little bit. This is the area from south of California out to the dateline, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, the official El Nino monitoring region. Temperatures today, 0.798. We'll call it 8/10 of a degree above normal. Not bad. And you see it's pretty much been holding there for about a month. But it's not getting any stronger. It's not building anymore. The model, the CFS model especially, and all the other models a month and a half ago were saying, we're on a steady upward trend. When we say in the title, El Nino is stalled, this is what we're looking at. It's there. The El Nino threshold is half a degree above normal for five consecutive months or something like that. We're above that threshold. We're in El Nino territory, but it's not getting any stronger. The ocean signal is there, but the question is there an atmospheric signal? And we've been debating that the past 2 weeks, trying to tease out, well, what's going on here? And we'll get into that. I think we're going to take a hard position on that here in just a second. Time to compare and contrast. Here is this year's El Nino situation. July 1st, 2023. Impressive, solid. Also, though, notice the cold upwelling pattern. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this. When are we getting our summer in California? And clearly, yesterday, things got very warm. But in general, trades, or we call them trades, the northwest winds that typically howl stronger than normal in spring are still howling. You saw it on the models when we looked earlier. There's still this steady northwest wind pattern that's just forecast. It's created upwelling, and that hasn't stopped. Now, near shore, things are okay in Santa Cruz, Half Moon Bay, and I haven't been surfing down in Southern California, but looking at temperatures there, it looks like temperatures are pretty close to normal, but still colder than normal for this time of year. Why is that? Well, one, the seasons have been delayed, and this is not unusual with La Nina. Typically, the start of summer is delayed by 4 to 6 or even 8 weeks. We're clearly in that pattern. We just got the first real taste of summer a day ago or 2 days ago, okay? And it's almost the 4th of July. Snow melt in the Sierra, still solid snowpack high, affecting hiking and elevation travel above about 9,000 feet. Waterfalls going absolutely nuts. All that attributable to, one, the fact that we got piles of snow, but two, that it hasn't warmed up at elevation until about the past 3 days, enough to really get the snowpack melting. At the rate things are going, who knows? It'll be late July or later till a good portion of that snow is melted out. Again, speaking to the La Nina delay of the season thing. Clearly in California, you can see it plain as day. And the La Nina influence on the atmosphere has just stomped on storm development in the southern hemisphere so far this summer. Worst summer ever. That said, there have been some swells and all, but nothing big. And it's pretty, I mean, right now it's really lackluster. Even when we do get swells, they're minimal. They're all super south angled, which is a clear La Nina sign, suggesting clearly that La Nina is still in control of the atmosphere. We have all this warm water, but it isn't doing anything to move the atmosphere towards El Nino yet. So, point number one, the atmosphere and the ocean are not coupled, and there's no real evidence to suggest it. If anything, they're backtracking. We'll get into that in a minute. But let's go on with the analysis. So this is 2023. Let's go look at some other significant El Niños. Here's July 1st on 2009, the 2009-2010 El Nino, pretty strong one. No comparison. This one looking much stronger. Okay, I'm breathing now. I'm feeling a little bit better. We're not completely in the doghouse. 2015, a super El Nino. Well, certainly better than 2009, July 1st. How's it compared to this year? Well, this year looks even stronger than that super El Nino. So, not too bad. Now, notice look out in here. We'll do the same thing. Notice a little bit more buildup of water here in the 2015 El Nino. But also notice here, not as much deep reds here in 2015 as there is today. Okay, feeling pretty good. Now let's compare it to the gold standard, 1997. Here's 97. Clearly stronger in almost every dimension other than the extent out here than the current El Nino. Let's see if we can get that one to pop up. There we go. So we'll just go back and forth. You can see stronger here, better depth of coverage out in here. Yep, for sure. And better depth in coverage out to, about 158, something like that. Yeah, one could argue it's close. But back here, definitely more warm water at depth in 97 than in 2023. All right, so then a little bit more analysis. Strong El Nino comparison in the Nino 3.4 region, the sea surface temperature anomaly. This is the centered data, trying to account for changes in the atmosphere due to warming of the atmosphere. The 82 El Nino in May, temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region. In fact, I'll draw it on here. You can see it. It's this area right here. That's the main El Nino monitoring region. Okay, we'll see if we can pull this guy back in here. All right. 82 in May, temperatures were 3/4 of a degree above normal. In 97, 3/4 of a degree above normal, and both these turned out to be super El Ninos. In 2009, 0.06 of a degree above normal. 2015, stronger than the previous two super El Ninos, 0.92 degree above normal. And in May of this year, this is hard data, 0.39. So that's suggesting this El Nino in May was stronger in 2009, but couldn't compete with any of the super El Ninos. In June, in 82, temperatures, notice they didn't really go anywhere, 0.72, 0.80 in June. So, and 82 was a super El Nino, very strong El Nino, but it stalled. In 97, though, temperatures skyrocketed from 0.76 up to 1.22. The 2009 El Nino, it kind of stalled too, didn't develop very quickly. 2015, well, that one, I'll say it kept building, but not at an aggressive pace. In 2023, well, we went from May, 0.39, I just guessed looking at the charts, about 0.8 of a degree estimate. So, well, that still puts us on track with 82. In fact, the build rate is higher than in 82. Now, just for fun, let's go look at 82 even more. It went from 0.8 down to 0.64 in July, eventually peaking out at 2.16 October. 97 went from 1.22 to 1.67 and a ridiculous 2.48 in November. So it was just a freight train the whole time. That's why I said it's the gold standard. Clearly 82 was a super El Nino too. 2009, well, it marginally did better in July, went from 0.31 to 0.48 and ended up at 1.73. That's a strong El Nino, but not a super El Nino. 2015, 0.92 to 1.17 to 1.45 to 2.71. Notice the strongest of any of the El Ninos in the past 40 years. Where is this one going to go? Well, we don't know. We could still theoretically reach minimum El Ninos, or minimum strong El Nino status, or super El Nino status, or maybe not. Let's go dig just a little deeper. What is the atmosphere doing? We're looking at the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Tahiti and Darwin, Darwin in the Indian Ocean roughly, Tahiti in the Pacific. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, the index goes negative. Daily contribution, certainly not negative, 1.68. Going down here a couple days, it hadn't been negative in a while. Yeah, we had a good run back there, but it's kind of a mixed bag. The 30-day average, 0.54. We're at dead neutral. We're not even in this would be not even active phase or inactive phase or El Nino or anything, just dead neutral. And where were we? We were down at minus 13.52 2.5 weeks ago. Oh, and then down to 18 or 19. So clearly the MJO machine has stalled big time. And then the 90-day average, this is the El Nino La Nina indicator. This is more like the active-inactive phase of the MJO. Minus 5.87, where were we? We were up at 7.5 or something like that a month ago, up to 7.7. It's starting to fade, but this is a 90-day average, so a month and a half from now, you'll see this probably at neutral or whatever. In fact, let's go look at a graph. So here's the past couple of years of the SOI average. The downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. The upward spikes are the inactive phase. If you are in El Nino, you have, on average, more active phases of the MJO driving the index down. If you're in La Nina, you have more inactive phases driving the index up, as you can clearly see here between 20 up to 19 January of 2023. And then we had this long 1, 2, 3 giant active phases of the MJO that created 5 or 6 Kelvin waves, some still in flight, some erupting. But then since May, we're back to dead neutral. Not good. Not what you want to see if you want to be in super or even strong El Nino territory. What the heck is going on? All right, data from the CFS model. Forecast for sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nino 3.4 region. So mid-June was here. We got up to a peak of about 0.9. Based on other data, I'm seeing 0.8. But, you know, all these different data sets, there's a little bit of variation between them. So we'll say 0.9. Going into mid-July, this is the raw data from the CFS model. It says temperatures going down to about 0.85. It's sensing this stall, this pause in the MJO machine. But then it says, well, theoretically, after that, temperatures continue to rise, inferring that at maybe not the active phase of the MJO, but westerly anomalies continue building as the base state of El Nino gets a deeper foothold in the far west Pacific, driving the engine to pump warm water, Kelvin waves, into the East Pacific, with temperatures eventually reaching 1.75 degrees. So that'd be equivalent of a 2009-2010 El Nino. Certainly not super El Nino status. The PDF corrected version of that model, the more conservative, says the correction is supposed to go even deeper, with temperatures falling back to 0.75 degrees. I don't know if I buy that by mid-July. That's a week and a half from now, when all the models are saying, no, westerly anomalies are supposed to start building 5 days from now. Even the conservative GFS model says that. And then temperatures building to 1.35 degrees, something like that, which would just be a moderate El Nino. That seems kind of hard to believe, too. Though something like that kind of happened in 2014 before the 2015 El Nino. So what's going on? All right, so the first little tidbit here is it is not unusual for the MJO to just stall out during summer months. I mean, it's pretty typical. One can expect it. It would be highly unusual, in fact, for the MJO to be just blasting away in July. Come the transition of the seasons, late August, September, that's when you see it starting to wake up. But now we have this, we'll say, 6 to 8 week delay in seasons. So really, it's July, but atmospherically, it's the 1st of June, if not earlier. So when will the MJO thing wake up? Maybe not till September or later. I was thinking it would be late July, but given the stall that's going on now, I'd say this kind of dead zone surf-wise in the Pacific will probably go into mid to late August, and then things will wake up. As the MJO wakes up, it'll fuel the jet stream, and we're off to the races. That said, let's go talk what that means for El Nino. The Southern Oscillation Index is stalled. We're dead neutral right now. That's all driven by the MJO thing. So the MJO will drive that. The good news is the flow of warm water continues under the equator, and westerly anomalies are forecast to continue to start building from 5 days from now on. If that happens, we're probably golden and we're okay. But if the westerly anomalies and if the CFS model and the GFS model all have it wrong, and a week from now we don't see at least some hints of a building westerly wind anomaly pattern, I'd begin to get pretty concerned about this El Nino. I mean, I don't know how you can have such a massive start as we've had, and then have the whole thing fall apart. So I don't really think that's going to happen. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know exactly where this is going. My hope is that the models are correct, the west wind machine starts firing up, and then we start, the pump gets kind of reprimed. It's almost like it's lost its prime. Not quite. We're fighting the season thing. We're fighting a massive transition in the atmosphere. 3 years of La Nina, the cold PDO that's been in place, and La Nina El Nino desperately needs to happen to vent off heat from the oceans, and it's trying to do that, but it's having some difficulties. I've said this before. It's like the atmosphere is like a big boat, and it takes a long time to turn. That's where we are. And we're in that point in the turning process where seasonally the MJO just isn't strong and the momentum isn't there to really allow the boat to turn as easily as it could come August or September. So we're kind of at a critical juncture right here. I think we're still moving ahead, certainly with El Nino. It's just a question of, well, how strong is it going to be? When's it going to hit? What's it going to do to the jet stream? When's it going to do it? And when will that start the storm development pattern? And right now, it's a big, I don't know, but I think we're okay, but let's dial in again next week and we'll find out. Hate to do that to you, but that's kind of where we're at. All right, that's the video for this week. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up. Where are we? There we are. If you have questions or concerns, you don't understand this stuff, write up a comment. I try to go in and reply as quickly as I can. There's a lot of other smart folks on the forum here, and they also chime in too and help us all get smarter together. If you have experience in this and you have a good feel for where this is going, let us know. We'd be happy to hear about it. If you'd like to give us a donation, thanks. We'd appreciate it. Not required, though. And with that, there is small southern hemi swell coming to California. If you live there, go get some waves. Enjoy it. Keep your fingers crossed for the New Zealand gale forecast forming in a couple of days. That should provide some surf for Hawaii. And do whatever you got to do to stay in shape, because when the floodgates open and the surf starts, you're going to be taxed hard. Keep yourself in shape, keep yourselves fit, and stay safe. We'll see you next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.